Welcome to the enLIGHTenUP podcast. I'm Lisa Watson and will be joined by my co-host Nicole Frolick and Brian Koenigberg. The enLIGHTenUP podcast is a weekly show that provides an unconventional and refreshing spin on spirituality, where three friends and weekly guests share informative, fun, and usually off-the-wall conversations. Unlike others, we provide fringe and skeptical viewpoints on all topics, because our experience has taught us that the echo chamber is a boring place from which to learn. So regardless of where you are in your spiritual journey, we can promise you're going to find a place to fit in here. So we invite you to grab a drink and listen in on our casual, entertaining, and hopefully enlightening conversation. And enLIGHTenUP is a self-funded podcast, so if you would like to help us to continue to be able to produce, enhance, and expand the show for our audience, then please send your support using the link in the show notes, or go to our website, enlightenup.us, and check out our merchandise shop, where you can purchase merchandise that will allow you to express some spiritual humor. You may also show your support by leaving us a review on iTunes and following us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Thank you all so much for listening and supporting us, and now let's jump right into the episode.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the enLIGHTenUP podcast. I am your co-host Nicole Frolick, and I'm also joined by my beautiful co-hosts Lisa and Brian. And today we have a new guest on with us. We have Bob Frissell, who is the founder of the Breath Alchemy technique, which he has been teaching for 32 years. His books are regarded as underground spiritual classics. In addition to the book, Nothing in This Book is True, but It's Exactly How Things Are, and the book, Something in This Book is True, as well as You Are a Spiritual Being Having a Human Experience. He has also sold 2 workshops across the world called The Breath of Life and The Flower of Life. Bob, welcome to the enLIGHTenUP podcast. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm just fine, and thank you so much for having me. So let's have some fun.
Yes, let's have some fun. Let's do it.
I like your book titles.
Very yeah,
clever.
well, thank you. It's I mean the titles have they have more than paved the way. It's worked very well. I've heard so many stories about how nothing in this book is true. The title itself, it just captivates people, and I'm really pleased to hear that.
I think it's great. When did you write your first book?
Well, that's a great question. I wrote my first book. Actually, the first edition of Nothing in This Book is True was published in August of 1994. So that's 25 years ago. Yeah. And what we just did in June of 19, just a few months ago, was we put out a brand new edition of it, the 25th anniversary edition, which in my mind is really a brand new book. It's got 10 completely new chapters. It's totally expanded upon the original version and all of that. But to go back for 25 years, I wrote a book. I wrote a book because I was asked to by a publisher. I mean, that was absolutely the least of my intentions. Now, you guys have mentioned Breath Alchemy. I had a different name for it back then. But one day back, and I think it was October of 1992, I got a call from a guy who sounded very, very skeptical on the phone, and because he was. And for some odd reason, he was calling to come and schedule a breathwork session for me. And in his own words, he brought his dark cloud with him. And I don't think he listened to me or believed a thing I told him, but during the midst of that session, he had a very powerful experience. And that caused him to sit up and take notice. And all of a sudden, the guy believed me and trusted me, and we were able to communicate. And I found out that he owned a publishing company. And I found out further that his company had published a book by Richard Hoagland on the monuments of Mars. Now, that caused me to sit up and take notice, because that was now getting into the area, one of the areas of my greatest interest. And so we developed a great friendship. He came for 33 consecutive weeks to do breathwork sessions, and that gave us a chance to obviously talk and get to know each other and develop really a great relationship. So one day out of the blue, the guy calls me up. Got to tell you, I was not auditioning to write a book. I mean, just the idea of it freaked me out. I didn't think I had anything to say. And And I was just, I was just talking to him because I was very, very interested in finding out as much as I could about what was going on in the Cydonia region of Mars, Richard Hoagland and the monuments of Mars and the area around there. And so then one day he calls me up and asks me if I would like to write a book on what he called the esoteric meaning of the monuments on Mars. Because you see, we just hit it off perfectly, and we're talking and he shared the same interests and all the rest of that. So he calls me up, and my first thought was, no, I don't want to write a. You kidding? I don't have anything to say. But then I remembered that 4 years prior, in 1988, I had made an internal decision. And that is that when a client of mine came to do a series of breathwork sessions, she revealed to me after, about 5 or 6 sessions that she indeed was an author and that she was keeping a very, she was keeping a diary, a notebook, or however you want to call that, on the sessions that she was receiving. And she suggested that we co-author a book. And when she told me that she did not have a publisher, and that in fact what we would be doing is writing a book proposal and then taking that around to try and find a publisher, I just decided, no, I don't want to do that. I didn't want to write a book anyway. But I just used that kind of like as my reason for telling her no. And I did not tell her, but I made an internal decision to myself only. And that is that the only way I would ever write a book is if a publisher comes to me and asks me. And hey, I thought I was safe.
That's sneaky. I like it.
Yeah, sometimes life sneaks up on you. And, I just realized, well, there's higher forces at work here. So they're saying no is not an option.
Yeah,
And,
there were definitely some synchronicities in there.
yeah, for sure. Well, that's just the way it's gone for me for, well, much more than 25 years right now. And that's just all a function of me being totally on purpose, just really being committed to what to me was really important. And what I discovered is that as long as I kept that burning fire going, that 100% intention, that people would just start to crawl out of the woodwork and they would give me exactly what I needed in the moment. And some of whom became great friends, most of whom I never saw again, but it didn't matter. It's just they gave me the perfect tip in the moment to keep me on the path and to keep me moving ahead. So it's that's that's fun, and it continues to the day.
That's a little interesting, because in a way, you were really resisting writing a book, and you have a very interesting story about the things that we resist and how, if we want to be a clear channel for healing, how we have to surrender. And so in a way, you resisting wanting to write was the very thing you were creating in coming into your reality, is the way I see it.
That's very well put. Yep.
That happened to me too with Brian.
Yeah. Won't this guy just keep going away? Just keep showing up.
Yeah. What you resist will persist. And that's one of what I like to call universal principles, that really my work is based on what I do call universal principles. It's based on 3 of them for sure, and a 4th one is kind of sneaking in there too. In fact, it has for a long, long time. But what you resist will persist is absolutely one of them.
Well, can you share that story with your tabby cat that you found? Because I know a lot of people will resonate with that. And I know Lisa will definitely resonate with part of your story. And I just think I think it is such an incredible story that highlights the power of what we're capable of if we actually get out of our way.
You're talking about Freddy. And it is an amazing story. This happened way back in the day, about it was 1979 when Freddy first came into my life. And what it was that he was he was found in a garbage can, and he was choking on a flea collar that was much too tight for him. And so, to me, cats are just about the greatest thing on this planet. So, I
Here, here.
have loved cats all my life, and would never be without one. So I immediately adopted Freddy, took him home, and just, gave him not only the home, but the love and affection that he absolutely deserved. And we quickly became best friends. But I think to get to the point here, in 1980, I spent a couple of months in Europe. I was training and I was traveling with a guy named Leonard Orr, actually the founder of Breathwork, to become a teacher of Breathwork. I had enough money for a one-way plane ticket to London. I mean, that's how much I put myself on the edge. But there was this inner voice telling me that, just, the way will reveal itself. Don't worry. Don't worry about the details. You got enough money to get to London. That's all you need. And so what it meant was it certainly put me through the loops. It brought up issues, emotional issues, and am I going to make it issues, and all of that I didn't even know that I had. So I got a pretty intense healing process, and I had to learn how to move through that and integrate that on a very rapid basis, because what I discovered is that I had some ability to learn something on one day and turn around and teach it on the next day. And I discovered that people would actually pay me for that. And so, and so that's how I worked my way through Europe. And not to mention, I got a free flight back from Amsterdam. But anyway, throughout all of it, at the time, the group that I was with, many of them were devotees of Babaji. Now, for those of you who don't know who Babaji is, I would refer you to the classic piece of literature called Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. And there's a chapter in that book called Babaji, the Yogi Christ of India. And to say that Babaji is a bit of a master, I mean, it's an incredible understatement. If you can accept what you read in that chapter in that book, then you'll begin to understand the sort of communication that began to happen with me. And what did begin to happen is that when we got to Sweden, to Stockholm in June of 1980, uh, uh, again, I was very much on the edge, and I don't know if I would have made it or not, but I did make it, because out of the blue, and I'd never ever had an experience like this in my life before, but all of a sudden there was an internal communication, and it was very, very clear. I understand exactly what this internal voice was telling me, the essence of which was everything is just fine. In spite of the outward turmoil, everything is just fine. Everything is working out. And for me, that was absolutely a lifesaver, without question. And so I just kept tuning into that on a daily basis, and that got me through Europe. Not only that, it got me a free flight back from Amsterdam, and I was able to from Amsterdam to get from Amsterdam to San Francisco for $99.
That's
and
nice.
and I mean, that's just another story on itself, but it was absolutely a Babaji related story. Uh, that's another tangent. Might come back to that, but we were talking about Freddy. So when I got back home, I was really, really glad to be back home. And uh, after, I don't know, I'm just guessing, this was way back in 1980, but maybe a couple of weeks, Freddy all of a sudden became paralyzed. That is, his two rear legs. He couldn't move them at all. He didn't seem to be in any pain, and it didn't seem to bother him at all. He was just being himself. He was just, the same good old guy, Freddy. And he was able to kind of like inch himself around. It was just so sad for me that even though he didn't have a problem with it, I did. And I didn't know what to do, so I took him to the veterinarian. And the vet didn't have a clue. So I brought him back home. And then one evening, we were sitting out in the back on the patio, and I was just going into my thing about Freddy, just feeling so sad and so sorry for him, and what can I do, and all of that. And then, out of sudden, here again, just completely out of the blue, nothing like this has ever happened to me before. But all of a sudden, I just started getting this internal, I don't know, internal understanding throughout all of my senses. And it kept growing and it kept building. And what the message was there was absolutely no reason that Freddy cannot be instantly, totally, and completely healed. And in just the matter of a very short period of time, it just grew with such intensity so that it quickly got to the point to where I knew with absolute certainty in every cell of my body that that was absolutely true. And in that moment, in that very moment, Freddy got up and he walked around as though nothing had ever happened.
Huh.
And I thought that was pretty good.
To
I had
their
a pretty
owners.
darn good idea who was behind this, but there is more. We're just getting started here.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So Freddy was just fine. Never, ever again did he suffer from this paralysis. Never again. Just like it never happened. But then one day, and I'm guessing the time frame is about 2 weeks, as I recall it best, that he came home one day from his daily territorial adventures, and everything was fine, except he had one eyelid completely closed. I didn't think too much of it, but it stayed that way for maybe a couple of weeks. And then when it opened, and it did open, what I saw did not look like an eyeball. It just looked like a piece of rotten, dead flesh that perhaps at one time was an eyeball, but now did not in any way resemble an eyeball. So that really caught my attention. And I didn't know what to do. I mean, who am I? And so I did the only thing that I could think of, and that's take him to the vet. And the vet, he could really offer nothing. He gave me some ointment. He wished me luck. And he advised me that I'd better get back to him pretty quick because he was going to have to surgically remove Freddy's eyeball. And oh man, I started wondering, well, would he even survive something so radical? And then I started wondering, well, what if what if he's got cancer or something like that? And um, I just felt quite helpless. But the same thing happened again. We're sitting back. It was about the same time of the early evening, and we're sitting on pretty much in the same exact spots, Freddie and I. And the same thing happened completely again. And just in a matter of, I don't think it took more than a minute or two, I knew with total and complete certainty. It just spontaneously presented itself. I didn't think it, I didn't plan on it, but the thought just came to me. There is absolutely no reason why Freddy cannot be totally and completely and instantly healed. It kept growing, it kept building, and it very quickly got to the point to, again, I knew with total certainty in every cell of my body. And in that point, in that moment, I watched one of the most amazing healings one of the most. I've never seen a better one, I don't think. It happened in an instant. His eyeball instantly transformed. It went from a piece of dead flesh to a perfectly normal eyeball. And I took him to the vet, and the vet was absolutely amazed.
Wow.
I was too, but not nearly as amazed as he was, because here's the other thing, and that is that it seemed like it was totally and completely natural and normal. I mean, I was just watching two amazing healings, yet at the same time, they both seemed to be natural and normal. And again, I had a very, more than a very good idea who was behind all of this. And so I have a picture. I still have the same poster of Babaji. In fact, I'm looking at it this very moment. I went into my room and I just started to gaze at that poster. And it's just like instantly. I didn't plan anything. It just happened. I sort of went into a trance. You might call it an open eyes meditation. And what I was doing was asking for confirmation. And what I said was, Babaji, was it you? And in that moment, that image of Babaji became alive. It became animated like a Looney Tunes cartoon, like Bugs Bunny dancing around. And that's exactly what he did. He started dancing around. And I thought that was pretty good confirmation. And I mean, and I don't often tell that part of it because it's just like, come on, this guy, what's he been smoking? It couldn't possibly be true. Yet that's exactly what happened. So, if that's too much for people to accept, I understand.
Well,
I do understand, but that's what happened.
It's your experience. And I mean that at the end of the day, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
But this idea of being able to be instantly healed or go through an instantaneous healing really was a huge lesson or teaching for you later in life.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it was so powerful that it took me at least 12 years to begin to get any understanding at all of what had happened. Because you see, I totally gave my power away for 12 years. Well, it was Babaji, I wasn't even there. And that's absolutely what it looked like. But I finally came to the conclusion, to the realization that what Babaji was showing me was, I've got all of this inside of me. And he was just, it was just coming through him. But what he was really trying to show me is that this is just who we are. And once you learn to tune in, then what previously was perhaps considered to be impossible, miracles become commonplace. So to just unpack this a little bit further, I was struggling, and that's kind of like putting it mildly. I was struggling with a low back injury that had really, well, it's like I felt that my life was taken away. I was very athletic. In fact, I was a professional bowler back in the day, and that's how I injured my back in a bowling tournament. And like a dummy, I just kept on going. I had no idea what I was playing with. You don't mess around with backs. I kind of learned that lesson the hard way. And many, many years later, I was still struggling with it. But when I finally got the message, it was sometime in 1991. And here I was, lying in bed, my back was out again. And I could, getting out of bed was a struggle. But the inner message that came to me was, I don't have to do this anymore. And then in that moment, I got my first major healing. Goodness sakes, in 21 years. I mean, I injured my back in 1970, and it wasn't until 1991 that I finally began to heal. And it was through the other major tool was the breath work, and which is why I got into and discovered breath work in the first place, because I had an experience way back in 1980 in a breath work session of energy going to that part of my back and I realized that was the key to my healing, that everything is energy. And that's you don't deal with the symptoms, you go to the source and harmonize the distortion, all the distorted energy. But again, it took me many, many years to really internalize that and get to the point to where I could accept it, to the point to create that kind of healing within myself.
Well, that's just it, is that the difference between us as humans and, for instance, Freddy the cat is that Freddy didn't resist his reality. He was okay with everything. Even when he was paralyzed, he was okay exactly with how things were. He was like, okay, this is my reality. And I know Brian's going to love this because he's totally understanding this principle through reading The Miracle Mind and the Miracle, or The Miracle Morning and the Miracle Equation. True. Where, when you don't have to be happy about your situation, but if you accept it and just allow it to be, then you're not resisting anything anymore. And that's what allowed that healing to come through, and for Freddy to receive it was because he had no resistance to anything.
Exactly. And that was the great lesson that I learned from Freddy. So Freddy, my good buddy, was in many ways one of my very, very best teachers. But here again, the lesson was not instant. It took me, 10, 12 years to even begin to internalize that. But once I got it, I got it.
How is it that some people, like, it's our beliefs that keep us from seeing these things?
Yeah, and cats don't have these limiting beliefs. He's just being Freddy,
Right, but you as the owner must not have either, or you wouldn't have been able to experience that. And I find it fascinating how some people who maybe don't necessarily seem like they have any different beliefs than anyone else, but have these types of experiences.
Well, here's the thing, and that is that the veil was temporarily lifted. That's what happened with my experience with Babaji, with the healing experiences with Freddy. Lifted the veil long enough to show me the possibility. And but here again, I was so immersed in my limiting beliefs that it took me many years to really get the lesson.
That's happened to me. I remember when I was going through one of my major awakening points, when I was on my 1-year sabbatical and really getting into yoga. And I remember lying on the mat in Shavasana and having these like questions that I used to ask for years and years and years. And then all of a sudden the answer would come in, and it would be so simple and so easy, but it wouldn't come in until many years down the road, and just in an instant like that. And I can see, for instance, for like the same thing as you, for me doing yoga was about not resisting what was trying to really be my reality, which was my reality. And I finally just kind of went with it and surrendered into it. And it was because of that surrender was what opened me up to receiving everything that was trying to come in, or what I wanted to come in really couldn't until I actually went into that mode of surrender. And Shavasana is like the ultimate pose for surrender.
The key word being surrender. Yeah, absolutely. So we all have this inner guidance. We all have our personal connection to source energy. I call it the higher self. But it's only available in the present moment, and it's totally a function of surrendering and allowing it to come through and clearing out enough of the baggage, you might say, to allow it to come through. And so it's an internal guidance system that will never, ever fail you if you just learn how to tune in and connect with your connection to source.
So is that the premise of your book? Nothing in this book is true, but it's exactly how things are?
Well, yeah, it really is. That's what it all boils down to. I make the case for the enormous infusion, the global transformation that's going on. As I like to call it, it's an enormous enormous infusion of higher dimensional energy that's coming in, and it's shedding the light on the darkness, and it's impacting and affecting everybody on the planet. And those who are able to align with it are able to, move out very, very rapidly these days. Those who resist, well, they are going to have a bit more of a problem. And so not only is there this global transformation, but here again, it's impacting and affecting everybody on it. And so that's what so much of my book is about, is just showing and detailing the personal transformation that we must make if we're to move through these changes in a way that enables us to come from our true nature, and to let go of the false self, and to tune into what's real. And yeah, that's
Letting go of the false self, otherwise known as the ego?
the mind, the ego. Yeah, absolutely. The mind is never, ever in present moment. It doesn't know the present moment. It has a very vested interest perhaps you've noticed, in being right.
I've
It's
never
in a continual
experienced
state of
that.
judgment, and it's that very judgment that keeps us stuck in our lower self. And so I make the point in the book that we exist in threeness, the higher self, the middle self, and the lower self. And when we're mind-based, as we have been, I suggest for about 13,000 years now, we are, as I said, never in the present moment and in a constant state of judgment. And that's the perfect way to block yourself from your true nature. So I further go on to say that in order to move into the higher self, you first must go down and reconnect with the lower self, which is a child of, say, about 2 to 4, maybe 2 to 6 years of age. Basically, what I'm getting at is that we need to find a way to let go of some of the baggage, and that is to heal the trauma that was laid upon us, even by loving, well-intending parents. We all get saddled with very limiting beliefs and emotional baggage that if you and I don't learn how to heal that, if we don't learn how to integrate it, it's going to start dealing with us in some very unpleasant and not very useful ways. And so that we must first go down and learn to deal and heal and transmute some of that baggage. And then the present moment begins to present itself, which is the gateway to the higher self, to our true nature, to our connection to source. It's only available in the present moment. It's not conceptual, it's totally experiential, and it's what life is really all about. So I'm quite certain that that's what the global transformation is all about, giving everybody the opportunity to discover their true nature, and makes life a whole lot more interesting.
Yeah, we talk about the lower self here as the inner child. And so,
Yeah,
and,
right.
and how important it is to go back and reconnect with that part and heal what was, really discover and uncover what the traumas or pains or inflictions or suffering was at that time, and then be able to give that back to yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The inner child, lower self, same thing. And so then I guess we've mentioned Breath Alchemy. That's the technique that I've used and teach others to use to transmute this stuck energy and to do it totally on an energetic or feeling level. So you totally bypass the mind, and which is a good thing, because if you're expecting the mind to heal the mind, it's why don't you get the fox to guard the chicken coop while you're at it, So I've found it kind of useful to find a way to totally bypass the mind and just go straight for the energetic healing, doing it completely on the feeling level. And that's
Well, the breath, for me was a huge lesson. It's definitely one of my fundamentals that I learned through my own journey of how much you can use the breath, like you said, to move energy around your body, to open up certain areas, and how much the body is able to do once you, because it's your breath, it's your life force. And so moving that life force through your body can have a really profound impact on how the body responds to you.
Yeah, exactly. Life force energy is absolutely what it is. It's prana, and prana is source energy. And so once you learn how to move this prana, this source energy, this life force energy through your body, and learn how to harmonize with it, well, you can create some rather miraculous healings. I mean, it would seem to be miraculous, but here again, miracles are just commonplace. It's just a matter of learning to step into, kind of like broadening your perspective a bit, so you can expand your ability to accept what's possible. Here again, letting go of some of those limiting beliefs.
I'm curious, you talked about your back injury. What limiting beliefs did you discover within yourself that were that the back injury was trying to point you towards?
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, just a ton of them, literally. It just goes down to survival stuff. Goodness sakes, that summer in Europe in 1980, all my issues of survival. They just came to the surface. They were just absolutely overwhelming. And, I had no choice. I had to learn how to deal with that. Had to learn how to integrate that, or I don't know if I would have made it.
What happened in your childhood that put you in survival mode?
Well, for what I suppose my story is not that all uncommon. Uh, I recall one incident where the conditioning. Well, I'd already learned. I was about 3 years old, and prior to that, I had already learned that love from your parents and acceptance from your parents is not unconditional. It is very much dependent upon
It's
me
anything but.
behaving in a certain approved manner. And of course, they were much bigger than I was, and they had the vocabulary, and they had everything. I was totally dependent upon them for my very survival, right? I mean, every 2, 3-year-old kid is, without exception. And so it's like, you better learn to conform or else. And so there's that. And then one specific incident when I was 3 years of age, my mother was in the kitchen making a cake, and it was a marble cake. There is actually such a thing called a marble cake. My mother
I
used to.
remember my mom made those.
Oh yeah, yeah. And so, little 3-year-old that I was, I thought, well, I was, I'll help my mother out. And so I went and I got my bag of marbles. And I said, here you go, mother. You're making a marble cake. You want to put these marbles in the cake, right? And then all of a sudden, I don't know exactly how it happened, but I dropped the bag or whatever, and all the marbles just spilled out of the bag. And uh, and I didn't understand my mother's response. I was being good. I was trying to help her, and I that just dropping the marbles, it shook me up, and I just became a bit, you might say, emotionally activated. And she kind of like compounded the issue, because what I needed more than anything else in that moment was just the love and understanding, her telling me that it's okay. And in fact, she getting down on the floor with me and helping to pick up the marbles and letting me know that everything was just fine. But instead, what I got was what seemed at the time like just a stern command to, get down there and pick up the marbles. And that, that really torched me off. I just went into a little tirade. Why me? And I was crying and kicking and screaming and just all the rest of that. And then my father got into the act, and so this quickly devolved, very quickly. What started out as a fun and joyful experience very quickly turned into, probably one of the worst days of my 3-year-old life. And I just use that as a specific example that, uh, as a small little child who does not understand, there must have been something wrong with me for feeling what I was feeling, for acting the way I acted. It wasn't given any sort of understanding, wasn't given any sort of that's okay. It's just the only thing I got was that was totally unacceptable behavior. So, as a small little child, what are you supposed to do with with the emotions that you weren't allowed to feel because there's something wrong with you for feeling them? What are you supposed to do with the behavior that's not accepted, that's emotionally driven? You're supposed to, suck it in and develop an act for being a good little child and behaving and acting in the right way. But what do you do with all that emotional baggage? If you've never learned how to be okay with it, if you've never learned how to process it, if you've never learned how to integrate that, do you think that's just going to go away? We become very, very good at finding ways to distance ourselves from feeling those unpleasant feelings. We become very good suppression artists, and we become good actors and actresses. But underneath it all, there's all this baggage that is still there. And sometimes, oftentimes, at the worst time, it'll present itself in the most undesirable ways.
No, and we have no idea that some of those things are there. Like you may think, I don't have any trauma. my
Yeah.
parents were great. And you think of all the things like they provided food and shelter, and, they took me to school and helped me with my homework and took care of me when I was sick and, you know, threw birthday parties for me, or, whatever the case may be. And you don't remember the marble incidents.
Yep.
You don't remember that they weren't patient with you, and that they didn't allow you to show up as your authentic self. And
Yep.
so it's very hard for a lot of people to go back and find these points that have created beliefs in them that are limiting.
Yeah, you don't remember it, but your subconscious does, and it determines up to 90% of your behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And
On
so
a
all of a
cellular
sudden,
level, you remember it.
yep, yeah, and so here again, if you don't find a way, as I like to say, go down to the lower self, or as you call it, the inner child, and find a way to heal that trauma. It's going to increasingly deal with you in unpleasant and socially unacceptable ways. I mean, and then it plays directly into, because we were so mind-based, and obviously still are, we're in a constant state of judgment, and the judgment, coupled with the mind's incessant need to be right, means that we get ourselves into a lot of trouble that is absolutely unnecessary. That stuff just clears up once you learn how to heal the emotional trauma that is generating it. And so,
How do you reverse engineer that?
well, the tool that I've always used is the breath work, because you see here again, what it does is completely bypasses the conscious mind. So it's not your mind that you're dealing with at all. What the prana in the breath work does, it brings up the feeling component, and I'll just maybe unpack that a little bit. Anytime that you and I make somebody or something wrong, and then coupled with our mind's need to be right about it, I'm really right and you're wrong. What you did was bad and wrong and terrible and awful. And I know because just same old mind chatter stuff. Well, there's really two components here. There's the mental component, the belief system or the thought belief that I'm right and you're wrong, and that has a lineage that goes way back. There's a whole line of very similar incidences that you've been right about, and the other person has been wrong about for a long, long time right now. So there's that mental component, and this becomes lodged in our subconscious mind, and just becomes part of our subconscious belief system. But at the same time, everything is just energy. And so for every concept or every belief or every thought that you and I have, there is always an immediate energetic component. Call it a feeling, a sensation in the body. And because you've made somebody or something wrong, the mental component has perhaps a lot of negative charge to it. You really believe you're make wrong, and you better shape up, or all that nonsense that goes with that. So there's a lot of negative charge about that's driving that. And so what that can only mean is that the instantly created energetic component, the feeling, can only be an unpleasant feeling. And so we live in a culture that has been thoroughly trained to resist unpleasant feelings. I mean, goodness sakes, our medical profession is built around it.
Yep.
Don't worry, Big Pharma, they'll give you a pill. That'll solve your problem. And so all it does is, it gives you a Band-Aid, a quick fix, and temporarily suppresses the symptoms. But that doesn't mean it goes away. All you've done is suppress it, and it's still there. And so here again, it's going to come up and reveal itself again and again and again until you learn to integrate it. And because it is a feeling in the energetic component, what I've learned is that you just go straight for the feeling, and you don't have to understand it. You don't have to have any sort of cognitive understanding. You just have to let go and trust enough. The breathing rhythm that I teach, I call it circular breathing. And what it does is twofold. It begins to run an enormous amount of not only oxygen, but also life force energy, or prana, through your body. Now, as I've said, prana is source energy. It is directly source energy. It is life force energy. We can't live without it. So it's pretty powerful and pretty pure stuff. What it begins to do is start lifting up feelings on the energetic level, feelings and sensations that you've been resisting, trying to suppress because you've been making them wrong and they didn't feel good. So when you bring it to your conscious attention, now the key is learning to change your relationship to the feelings so you can harmonize with it. What you resist will persist. If you keep making it wrong, you're only going to get more of it. It's only going to increase in intensity. But if you can find a way to allow the feeling to be, to make peace with it rather than war with it, now you can go into it, you can expand to include it, you can relax in its presence, and you can begin to tune it in to feel it so thoroughly that you can actually feel the subtle changes moment by moment. Well, that's the equivalent of shining the light on the darkness, you know? Whenever you do that, darkness cannot survive in the presence of light. And so you're shining the light of your conscious awareness on the darkness within your soul that's been suppressed, and so it literally transforms or transmutes the energy into your sense of well-being.
I 1000% resonate with this, because that's exactly what I learned in my yoga journey, is that, I was very inflexible, and I remember sitting in a seated spinal twist, and looking around the room and looking at how far everyone was able to look over their shoulder. And me, I was like halfway turned in, and just like trying to force them. I was like, come on, if I just push a little harder, just push. Yeah. And then finally I was like, well, what if one day I was in that spinal twist and I thought to myself, what if I was just okay with where I was today? Like, what if I was actually just okay with it instead of trying to change it? And that is what completely shifted everything for me. As soon as I was okay with it, all of a sudden my body went relaxed and went right back further into the spinal twist. And I remember, I'll never forget that moment of understanding the whole idea of that which we resist persists. And also the idea of, like you said, making peace with the moment, not making war. I think that's beautiful. And it's so important to realize that when you can accept your reality exactly as it is and be okay with it, that's when you're free. That's when the changes are free to be made, if they're meant to be.
Yeah.
It's the same with when you have like a trigger, like somebody says something to you and it causes a reaction. To me, that's a great way to kind of reverse engineer something you might not have realized happened to you in your childhood. And using yoga, which I love the analogy, to just think of like, it's when you're, you have that pain in that muscle stretch and that feeling in your pose. And instead of resisting it, like you said, Nicole, you just kind of feel it. You don't resist it. You're just like, I'm okay with this pain.
And you breathe into it.
And you breathe into it. And I've learned to do that with my triggers, where, somebody says something and I immediately feel, like my feelings are hurt, or wow, that person was such a jerk to me, or why did you have that tone, or whatever. And instead just stop for that moment and think of it like a yoga pose and be like, how about I'm just okay with this,
and breathe into it
and allow myself to feel it, and maybe ask myself, when have I felt like this before? Like, what is this trying to show me that's inside of me, as a trauma point that I'm not aware of? And the more and more you have this awareness and you pay attention to those triggers, it leads you back to these feelings that you may have had when you were younger. And you may never remember a specific incident. You just may remember feeling that way when you were young, like that you were treated that way or something. It may be more in general, which is fine, but it at least allows you to acknowledge it, comfort yourself, validate your own feelings, and let it go.
Yeah. And the advice that I've been given for the last year and a half, as I've gone through my own healing for my own body, was just focus on the feeling. Just allow the emotional charge to come through, feel it, and let it move through you. And like you said, don't try to stop it, suppress it, put a Band-Aid on it, like pretend it doesn't exist. Just let it move through you and let that leave your body, so to speak, leave your energy field, because it really does. That's where the higher charge is carried. And then it starts to resolve itself through the mind and then through the body itself.
I like how Eckhart Tolle talks about, being present in his book, The Power of Now, where those past memories, he talks about there's no such thing as past and future, because there is only the now, because even those past memories that you may be dwelling on, they only can occur, at a present moment. Everything that has ever happened to anyone happens, at a, present moment. So even when we think about the past, it's just a remembrance of a present moment that had once happened. And if you worry about the future, you're literally worrying about a potential, now moment that, may or may not happen.
Exactly.
I love that you're quoting Eckhart Tolle now. And I also wanted to say that the important piece in there as well is that when you have that charge and you have that feeling, if you feel like you feel like it's coming from some external person or some external circumstance, to understand that nothing comes from the outside, that it has to be vibrating somewhere in you in order to appear in your reality.
Yeah, that person has just acted as a trigger to reactivate something within you that you've been avoiding and suppressing and making wrong perhaps for a long, long time, giving you an opportunity to revisit that and to integrate it at the feeling level. So the other point I would like to make for you guys is that when you integrate at the feeling level, you have integrated throughout all of your senses and on all levels. So what it does is it completely disarms the conceptual component at the same time. The two are completely interlinked, and so that's the value and the beauty of learning to integrate at the feeling level.
In Brian's defense, I first read Eckhart Tolle like 15 years ago. So,
but you only started quoting him today.
No, not necessarily. That's
Eckhart
Tolle. It's the first you've heard me.
I was first introduced to Eckhart Tolle in 2003. A breathwork client of mine, he came to one of the sessions and he was all excited, and he says, "You got to read this. This guy is saying the same exact same thing that you are." And so he gave me a copy of The Power of Now, and I'd never ever heard of Eckhart Tolle. Even I think his book came out 2 or 3 years prior to that, but I don't know, somehow I missed him. I never heard of him. And so I started looking at that book, and I began to instantly agree. We are talking about the same thing. So I was...
Well, the mind doesn't really know the difference between real or made up in the mind. So, if you are, having a memory, it doesn't know that it's not happening right now or not. And that's why the now is really at any moment that it's just that moment to moment thing.
Yeah, well, it's the in the present moment is always and only the key to your inner awareness, to your inner compass, to your connection to source through your higher self. Never ever available through the mind. Sorry, folks, it's just not there.
Talking to you has been really a nice reminder for me to recall some of my experiences, that sometimes, as you go on in life, you get caught up in what's happening in that present moment. And sometimes you don't always anchor into the lessons that you've learned and kind of are able to wed them into the present moment of what's happening now. And I think you having that understanding with Freddy, I should say it's Freddy's teaching of being okay paralyzed. Like, that's okay, so I'm just paralyzed. This is, I guess, my reality today, and I'm okay with it. And it reminded me instantly of the time where I was in my silent meditation retreat on day 4, and I completely felt like just energy. I felt like I left my body, and I remember that feeling of pure contentment, of never not wanting to change anything, of being okay with everything exactly as it was, and me being exactly as I was. And that, hearing Freddy's story, really brought me back home to that place. And taking that and bringing it into my present moment now, I can see how I could shift a lot for myself and get out of my way just by, like you said, making peace with reality and being, okay, cool. This is where it is today.
Yeah, absolutely one of the keys, and it took a cat to teach me. So so be it.
They're great teachers.
For sure.
Yeah, Lisa and Brian have a couple cats, and
they've taught us a few things for sure.
Well, they're always in the present moment. That's a pretty good lesson right there. They're unconditionally loving and accepting. Of course, if that implies that you treat them properly, show them love and respect, and they'll show you more than well. It's just amazing, as you know, and they are great teachers. There's no
unless
question
you
about it.
leave them for too long and you come home and then they snub you.
Or poo on your pillow.
Well, don't leave them for too long.
Well, Bob, it was such a pleasure to have you on the show today. Thanks so much for joining the conversation.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I've certainly enjoyed every moment of it. And, here again, I just really appreciate your asking me, and thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any upcoming workshops or events or anything that you'd like to share with our audience? Or if they'd like to get in contact with you, how can they do that?
Well, the best way to contact me, just go to my website, bobfrissel.com, and you'll get contact information there. You can send me an email, and you'll find out just what I do. You'll find out much more about my books and about the Breath Alchemy technique that I teach. And I give my sessions on Skype, so I've got clients all over the planet, and which I really like. So distance is never ever a problem if people ever want to do that. And then the other thing I'll mention is that I've got a bunch of online courses on my website. The Flower of Life workshop, which I gave live from 1995 to 2016, I think it was. What I did was I put it onto a video course. It's an online home study video course, and that's available on my website, as a number of other related items are also. So yeah, the best way to get hold of me is just go to my website, bobfrissel.com. And if you want to send me an email, I'd love to hear from you.
Oh, great. Well, I definitely want to check out your 25th edition book. Is that the one? Nothing in this book is true, but it's exactly how things are. I love that title, by the way.
That's the one. And recently, actually January 21st, was the launch date for the audiobook, which is narrated by me. Another amazing story of improbable coincidences that just happened to line up, and I think the audio recording came out really good. It was quite an experience for sure.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Bob, for being on the show. And thank you again to our audience for joining us this week. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. We will be back with you again, and we love you all.
Thank you all for joining our show. We appreciate you tuning in and supporting us. If you have any questions you would like answered on the show, or any guests you would like to hear on our show, please email that information to us at info@enlightenup.us. And please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And if you're interested in contacting Nicole or myself for some coaching or any of the other services we provide, you can find out more about Nicole at inflexibleme.com, and my website is lisaloveslove.com. Thank you again for joining us and supporting our show, and we will be back with you all next week.